That story happened in my senior year. My girlfriend and I both spent time studying in the library every day. One day she offered to take a day off to prepare my birthday gifts with her. Hearing that, I teased her that just wrapping her in my gift box would be fine. So she pinched my ears and said that I had some shady intentions in mind, right? I looked at her and said that she and I had known each other for a long time and should also consider getting married. I told my girlfriend that I didn't care much about my birthday because I looked quite old compared to the other students. By the way, I told her the story that made me miss school for 2 years and had a bad impression of my birthday. On my 12th birthday, my mother asked me to wear a red triangular paper bag. She said that the year was my year and told me to wear it every day, shouldn't tear it or lose it. Although I didn't like it very much, I still obeyed my mother's orders to wear a string with a red paper bag around the neck. Then I rushed to play with my friends. My friends and I gathered to play marbles together. When it was my turn, something embarrassing happened. When I crouched down, my red underwear was revealed. One of the guys in the group noticed and pulled my pants off. The group kept laughing at me, saying that I had a problem with my gender and thought I was an idiot. I held at him that I wasn't an idiot and told them I wore red underwear because this year was my year and my mother made me wear it. At this time, another guy living next door to my house confirmed that my mother had given me a red amulet and the underwear was related to that amulet. So he teased me and begged me to show the amulet on my neck. A few other friends also came and said they wanted to see my amulet. So I took off the amulet chain around my neck. My friends had never seen such amulets, so they all found it very strange. By the way, I was also joking that this amulet could help see ghosts.
Wow.
But unexpectedly, they believed my lie to be true. They came closer and took a closer look. I was afraid that if my friend held it too hard, it would tear my amulet, so I quickly got it back. But he lunged forward to snatch the amulet from my hand. I showed an unpleasant attitude, saying that this was not for fun. If the amulet was broken, I would be scolded by my mother. But that boy wanted to get my amulet, so he asked me to play marbles. He bet on 3 of the latest comic books in exchange for my amulet. After hearing that, we were all surprised. I had long wanted to read the 3 comic books he talked about, but he wouldn't lend it to us. With the instigation of other friends, I began to think. Yes, wasn't this amulet just a red paper bag? Therefore, he and I would decide whether to win or lose in the game of marbles. But unfortunately, I lost the necklace to my friend because, well, I lost. Looking at his proud appearance, I felt very uncomfortable. Without the amulet, I was just afraid of being scolded when I got home. After the amulet was taken by my friend, I had to walk home. When I got home, I kept quiet for fear that my family would find out that I had lost the amulet. Luckily, they didn't notice. For the next few days, my life went on as normal. Until the following weekend, we arranged to bake sweet potatoes on the hill where we used to go. When everyone was busy building a fire, my friend discovered something. He said he saw a coffin. He ran over and took a closer look. It was a broken coffin. It seemed to have been trapped by a landslide caused by heavy rain 2 days ago. Although curious, the stench emanating from the crack in the coffin lid made us nauseous. We were starting to get a little scared, but my friend didn't want to leave. He stood still, his eyes fixed on the crack in the coffin. Suddenly he turned his head and said with a worried look that he wanted to see what was inside the coffin. I advised him not to be so stupid, but he ignored me and still insisted on pulling it out, so I left, ignoring him. Seeing me ignore him, he aimed at my shame point with his red underwear. He said that I was only a coward. He also said that my amulet was fake, that I was just a liar, and that even our family lied. Frustrated, I turned around and told him that I wasn't afraid of what was inside the coffin and would open it with him to see what was inside. The two of us struggled for a long time and couldn't move the coffin because most of the coffin was still in the ground, and there was also a lot of dirt on top of it. The two of us continued to pull the coffin lid. Suddenly, the piece of wood he was pulling came loose. Before he could prepare, he lost his balance and fell backward. Fortunately, there were no serious problems. The coffin board was casually thrown aside by him. Looking at the pointed end of the board gave me chills. In the coffin, there was an opening big enough for us to get in. I could even try to glimpse the corpse inside. My friend remained unafraid and said he wanted to go inside to find out. In the blink of an eye, he jumped inside and urged me to follow. It was very dark inside, and the smell was disgusting. This coffin was just enough for the two of them to get in, but there was no room to turn around. I felt a dead body in front of me, so I was extremely worried. After struggling for a while, we finally hit a spark. My friend was not afraid at all. Although the light of the match was limited, we could still see the contents of the coffin. We were suddenly stunned by the sight before us, which was a shriveled woman's body. Because he was so scared, the match in his hand fell. Even more frightening, we saw between the legs of that woman still a dead baby. It was only partially protruding from the woman. Terrified, we all felt short of breath and quickly climbed out of the coffin. Seeing the two of us crying while running, the other two friends thought we saw zombies. They quickly asked us what happened. The friend described the situation in the coffin to them while I was breathing heavily next to it. It was probably the fastest run of my life. The potatoes were cooked. They invited us to eat baked sweet potatoes while comforting us. We looked at the two sweet potatoes that had been baked to the point of shriveling like the corpse we just saw now, so we both ran away and vomited. That night, because I was still haunted by the story in the afternoon, I couldn't eat dinner. Then I went to my room to go to bed early. At midnight, I had a high fever again. I was tired and I was dreaming. Suddenly, I found myself not in bed, but locked in a wooden box. It felt like being in a coffin. Someone next to me shouted, making me dumbfounded. I saw a woman with a pregnant woman lying next to me, screaming while banging on the board above. Suddenly, my view turned to the outside and I saw a large group of villagers gathered. I seemed to understand the problem. This woman was being buried alive by the men in the village. When the last piece of land was filled in, the woman's screams could barely be heard outside. More frightening at this time, the woman seemed to be about to give birth, holding her belly and crying in pain. But the oxygen in the coffin was getting weaker and weaker. At this point, the woman seemed to have exhausted all her strength. The scene was so real that I was so scared. I could only cover my eyes with my hands. In my dream, I vaguely heard my mother calling my name. At this time, I had a very high fever and my whole body was hot. My grandmother and mother were very worried. Grandma seemed to have discovered something. She sadly looked at my condition. In the blink of an eye, she discovered that the amulet on my neck was missing. My grandmother quickly went out in a hurry. Moments later, my grandmother came home with a red amulet in her hand. It turned out that she went to my friend's house to get it back. Although annoyed, I still tried to ask my grandmother about the amulet. She said this amulet was very important to me. It helped me to exercise and not be invaded by evil spirits. Then I put on the amulet and fell into a deep sleep. After taking the cold medicine, I immediately fell asleep. The following morning, my condition was basically recovered. Because I didn't eat yesterday, now I ate like a hungry ghost. At this time, the friend we had baked sweet potatoes with the day before came running over and said that the friend who robbed my amulet was dead. I was stunned as soon as I heard that. I broke out in a cold sweat. I wondered if the female zombie in my dream killed him. My friend said he fell from a tree and died. Now the whole village was gathering to see the situation. More frightening, this was where we saw the coffin earlier. As we passed through the crowd, we saw his parents crying over his body. We were also shocked because his death was so tragic. He died because the wooden coffin lid was broken and thrown aside by him. Unexpectedly, his sharp piece was located under the tree where he took the bird's egg. The elders of the village proceeded to bury his body. My grandmother said that the amulet was my own. Even if he wore it, it wouldn't work. After hearing my story, my girlfriend was amazed. She thought it was a story I made up to comfort her. It sounded like a myth, but in reality, I was only saying what I had witnessed with my own eyes. When I started university 5 years ago, my parents rented me a small flat in an old apartment building near the school. I believe that everyone might have had a reckless childhood, but no one should be like me, since I had witnessed a terrifying event. That night, I went back to my passion, climbing to the next balcony, and of course, not to steal anything, but because living in the room next door was a really attractive girl who attended the same school as me. I had no dirty intentions. I simply wanted to see her every day and watch her read, study, or simply clean the room. I would be at her balcony at 10 p.m. sharp every night, carefully opened the curtains with my hand and peeked inside. She appeared to be sweeping the floor at the time, carrying a piece of paper in her hand, and she looked quite cheerful. But then I realized she was talking to someone. I began to wonder who she was talking to, or whether she was using a headset to make a phone call. Most likely, she was chatting to her lover. Her body leaped abruptly.
Honey, don't do that while I'm cleaning the floor.
Despite the fact that she was dressed simply in a shirt and pants, her body was really appealing. She was staring into the air with wide round eyes and curly eyelashes, producing a gentle voice. Was she practicing a play? It wouldn't have made me feel like a genuine man was really there in front of her if it was simply talking on the phone. It was clear that they were practicing a play, although this one appeared to be a bit too sensitive. Standing behind the window frame made me feel more thrilled and shy than I had ever felt before. Was she actually acting in a play? If only I could play the male lead. She slid down the sofa, her thin but plump body hidden behind those garments. Everything was made more appealing by the long hair that fell on the sofa. Sweating heavily and taking slow, deep breaths, it looked like she was hugging someone. Even if it was only a rehearsal, it looked so real. This was quite daunting for a teenager like me. I stood there for a long time, and despite the fact that there was dew on the ground, I didn't feel cold at all. At the moment, I was still thinking, wow, I truly hit the jackpot today. That night, even though I returned to my room, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning and thinking about the scenario at the time. To be honest, I was such a pervert back then. I went to school the next day with dark circles under my eyes and couldn't open them since I couldn't sleep all night. I was walking back to my room from school when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, the corridor was empty, and no one was there. Something piqued my attention as I was ready to return to my room. And what I noticed was the door key, which was still plugged into the door handle of a room. Maybe because my neighbor forgot it in a rush. I was extremely curious to see how it would be like in her room, and how it felt to lay down on her bed. And it seemed that tiny monster in my mind had triumphed, since curiosity and intrigue compelled me to open it. My heart began to feel guilty as the door opened, but my hands couldn't stop. I was acting exactly like a pervert. I entered the room gently, opening the door. A feminine smell wafted through the room, erasing some of my shame. The space was poorly lit and quite empty. Curiosity raised again inside me after standing for a while and gazing around the room. I began digging through the shelves, through photo albums, books. I didn't even remember what I was looking for. I was perplexed by the underwear dangling from above. This was the bathroom. Such a girl she was. There were many different kinds of shower gels. It also had a very pleasant and enticing fragrance. And as I proceeded to the back door of the room, which had to be the bedroom, I swiftly opened the door and peered into the room out of curiosity. I'm sorry, I didn't intend to come in here. I was terrified because there was a man sleeping on the bed. Her lover, without a doubt. A tall man laying still on the bed appeared to be sleeping, and I might have jolted him awake. I'm sorry, please don't beat me. I didn't intend anything bad, I said loudly, hoping he would pardon me while hiding my face with my hands for fear of getting slapped. When I spotted the key on the door, I decided to bring it in and give it back to the owner, I said. True though, doing bad things was simple to stress about. My sweat was streaming and I'd always been a coward. Then I gradually calmed myself and opened my eyes again after explaining with my eyes still closed. What a strange thing it was for me to summon the courage to face him in the eyes. He was like a statue, laying immobile on the bed. Only now I got the courage to investigate further, and it turned out to be a humanoid statue. It's a statue? What brought it here? I was still sweating heavily and terrified. A frightening noise sounded from behind me before I could restore my calm. The door behind slowly opened. Perhaps there were still people at home. There had to be someone inside, or the door would not have been opened. However, when the door was fully opened, I was able to see well inside. Oh, what a dreadful sight I would never forget. It was the kitchen, and there was a dark shadow standing there, shaped like a human. But it was simply a murky, hazy shadow, and it was slowly making its way towards the door, and me. The closer it approached, the more its shape twisted, becoming even more horrifying. My legs were paralyzed and I couldn't move. I was standing at the door, trying to get out. I was able to jump out the door with all my remaining power and fell to the ground. And as soon as I got out the door, I collected all my bravery and kicked the door shut in the aim of locking the monster inside. After that, I sprang up and sprinted like an athlete, wishing I could get out of this place as soon as possible. All of my tiredness and exhaustion when I got home from school vanished. I could only close my eyes and run oblivious to the moon. That night, I went to a friend's house to sleep, and I didn't dare to tell anybody about it because honestly, I hadn't done anything to be proud of back then, and telling it would be humiliating. After a few days, I notified my school that I was going to live in the school dormitory, and now that I've had the confidence to tell you this narrative that I've kept concealed until now, I'm sharing it with you in this video. The ghost wedding was a type of marriage ceremony of the afterlife which appeared before the Han Dynasty in China. It was the betrothal of an unmarried person to a deceased person as husband or wife. In my village in the 90s, I heard a story related to this ghost wedding. In the village, there was a girl named Fang. Fang had an older brother. Because of her family's poverty, her mother married her to a dead man to get money for her brother's marriage. Their family was wealthy, but they only had one son, Sin. Sin had been sick since childhood. A monk said that Sin would not live to be 20. Sin lived to be 25, but his condition worsened shortly after his birthday. He went to many doctors, but they all refused to treat him. Then Sin passed away. But he was not buried. His parents bought a girl to have a wedding with him. The chosen one was Fang. But ever since Fang married Sin, strange things kept happening. The day Fang's wedding took place, no one attended because Sin's parents didn't want many people to know. After performing strange rituals in the church room, it was already dark. Then Sin's parents took Fang to Sin's room and went out. After a long wedding day, Fang felt tired. She took off her wedding dress, lay on the bed and fell asleep. In her sleep, Fang suddenly felt like someone was around her. A cold hand was touching her. Fang was awakened by that cold hand. When she opened her eyes, she saw a man sitting by the bed. She felt that the man was very familiar, but she couldn't remember. The man suddenly said, "Don't be surprised. I am Sin. You are my wife now." Fang heard the man say that. In her heart, she did not believe, because how could Sin come back to life? Sin looked at Fang and flashed a ghostly smile. He said, "Of course I am dead, and now I am just a soul." At this moment, Fang saw the altar picture behind Sin. The man in front of her was exactly like the person in the photo. She couldn't believe they were the same person. That made Fang only have one thought in her mind, that he was a ghost. Fang screamed and fainted. Early in the next morning, Fang woke up feeling aching all over her body. She saw the blood on the bed and remembered what happened last night. She thought someone had faked Sin and tricked her into losing her virginity. Because how could the dead come back to life? After thinking about it, she dared not tell her husband's parents that she had been tricked into losing her virginity on the first day of marriage. Because if this got out, she didn't know how she would live. Her husband's family was very good to her. Every day they all nourished her. Fang didn't have to do any work because they were afraid she would get tired. But the better they treated her, the more guilty she felt. So, it had been more than 4 months since Fang got married and stayed in their house since Sin passed away. Fang was more and more scared because her belly was getting bigger and bigger. She didn't know how to explain it. But when they saw Fang's belly, they were not only not angry, on the contrary, they were very happy. Fang turned from fear to curiosity. One day after having dinner, Fang felt so bored. Therefore, she walked around the house alone. As she reached the corner of the street, she saw two women talking. When Fang heard them talk about her, she hid against a wall and listened to the story. It turned out that Fang's strange marriage and a pregnant belly had become the matter of discussion. Fang felt very uncomfortable hearing them talk about her. Fang was sad when the two women talked about her growing belly. They said that it was most likely a ghost fetus. Fang was horrified to hear this. She didn't know and didn't understand what a ghost fetus was. Suddenly, she remembered the scene on the first night of marriage. Was it really Sin that came back that night? Fang did not dare to listen to the story of those two women anymore. She desperately walked home and was so scared that she didn't know what she was carrying. Fang returned home, her heart heavy. She didn't pay attention to the greetings of her husband's parents and went straight to her room. Then she climbed right into bed and fell into a deep sleep. While fast asleep, Fang heard the door creak from outside. A cold wind rushed in and Fang was startled awake. She sat up and looked at the door. At this moment, Fang could see clearly that a shadow had come in front of her. Fang saw the shadow that was Sin, her dead husband. Fang heard Sin's confession about himself. With more anxiety in her heart than fear, Sin was not as fierce as before and very polite. He stood by the bed and kept his distance from Fang, but Fang felt many doubts. Fang still didn't believe Sin was dead. Sin turned to go to the window and began to tell the story. Sin had been sick since childhood. The family sought many remedies, many healers to cure him, but to no avail. When Sin was 15 years old, a man claiming to be a monk could help him continue his life by following the monk to study religion. Sin's parents loved him very much, but because they wanted Sin to live a few more days, they let him follow the monk. Time flew. 3 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Sin's parents were very worried and always waited for his return. Suddenly one day Sin returned. The couple was happy to see him. However, no matter what his parents asked Sin, he did not tell them where he had gone during those years. After that, Sin passed his 20th birthday. His parents were happy to see that his face was rosier than before, but Sin had very strange expressions. His father saw that Sin was not happy. He was worried about Sin's illness, so he asked. When Sin said that he would not live to 25 years old, his father immediately felt worried. Sin looked at his father as if remembering something. He began to explain to his father. The old monk helped him improve his physical strength, but it was limited to 25 years old. The monk said when Sin was over 25 years old, he would die. Sin had hoped that when he died, his parents could find someone to marry him. If the wife agreed to enter the wedding chamber within the first 7 days, she would give birth to a son for his family. When Fang heard this, she was completely dumbfounded. It turned out that Sin was a ghost. He didn't lie to her. Fang picked up the pillow and threw it at Sin, but the pillow passed through Sin's body. Sin was not angry but happy to tell Fang his true purpose. Sin wanted to use the ghost fetus in Fang's belly so that he could be reincarnated as a human. At this moment the door was kicked open. Fang and Sin simultaneously looked towards the door. It was the old monk. At that time Sin stopped studying and returned because he couldn't stand the hardship. However, he had stumbled across the resurrection method in the monk's room. When he saw Fang's stomach, the monk understood what had happened and was very angry. According to Sin, the monk did not want to save him because the monk did not tell him about this method. Meanwhile, the monk knew that Sin's heart was not good, so he soon lost his way. Sin didn't believe in the old monk. He thought the monk had a good method, why not show him early? Knowing that Sin couldn't be stopped, the old monk was determined to destroy Sin's ghost to save Fang. The monk drew a spell in the air and pushed towards Sin. Sin tried to escape, but he found his legs couldn't move. Sin saw 4 small ghosts appear on him. They held Sin so he couldn't move. At this moment the old monk walked towards Sin, took out a piece of charm paper and stuck it on his forehead. Seeing black smoke on his head, Sin was very scared in his heart. The old monk went to Fang. He wanted to save her before the ghost fetus was completely formed. Fang felt very scared now, and without consulting her, the monk took out a piece of charm paper, mumbling something. After reciting the spell, the talisman in the monk's hand also spontaneously caught fire. Then the monk said a sentence. The bowl of water on the table flew into his hand. The old monk stuffed the talisman paper into the bowl. The water in the bowl caught fire. Fang was afraid and covered her eyes. When the fire was extinguished, the water in the bowl turned red. The monk said that if Fang just drank this bowl of water, the ghost fetus in her belly would be destroyed. Fang fainted on the bed after drinking the bowl of water, and a black liquid came out from Fang's lower part. At this time the monk looked back at Sin. Sin was weak and fading. He angrily cursed at the monk. The old man walked towards Sin, holding a wooden sword in his hand as if he wanted to finish Sin directly. At this time, Sin's mother heard and rushed to intervene. When the monk did not notice, a mother's hand suddenly snatched the talisman from Sin's forehead. As soon as the energy that suppressed him disappeared, Sin turned into a gust of wind and fled. The monk knew that Sin's mother loved Sin very much, so even though he was enraged, the old monk still ignored it, and then he left without looking back. Sin's father and mother looked at the door, crying until their tears ran dry. They knew it was wrong to love their son that way and felt sorry for their son and sorry for Fang. The next day, Sin's parents moved away with Fang. No one knew where they went, but everyone noticed that Fang's belly wasn't that big anymore. This story centers around a small town which was always busy and crowded. There was a very popular small dumpling restaurant in town. Pao was a regular customer of this restaurant. One day he invited two of his friends to go with him. The restaurant opened at 4 p.m. and closed just merely 2 hours later, so those who wanted to taste the food had to go early. The owner of the restaurant was a middle-aged man. As he recently made some changes to his recipes, the food had been selling like hot cakes. It looked like there was only one table available at the restaurant. Pao and his two other friends sipped their tea while waiting for their food to be served. 15 minutes later, the dumplings were finished. Pao and his friends were delighted as soon as they knew the food was ready to be served. The steamy dumplings arrived in a wooden container. The appetizing aroma made Pao and his friends drool. They quickly grabbed chopsticks and picked up the dumplings one by one, hungrily ate them whilst not forgetting to dunk the cakes into the red sauce. As part of the white dumpling was covered with sauce, Pao stuffed it in his mouth and chewed on it with a joyful expression on his face. After tasting the dumplings, one of Pao's friends expressed his utter amazement. He didn't expect the cakes to be so tasty. As the guys were enjoying their dishes, one of them suddenly chewed something very hard. Thinking his friend had accidentally chewed a grain that was left in the dumpling, Pao quickly reassured his friend not to be bothered about it. But what was worth mentioning here was that the guy in the blue shirt removed something from his mouth, and it was definitely not a grain. His face changed color as he gazed at the thing he'd just taken out from his mouth. His limbs started to tremble. He stammered, "Human nail!" How could there be a human nail inside one of the dumplings? The nail was covered in a substance that looked extremely dirty. Pao was shocked and outraged. He was furious to think that these dumplings were made in filthy conditions. The unexpected appearance of human nails inside the dumplings didn't just happen to Pao and his friends. As the nearby tables also encountered the same situation, they started calling out the restaurant owner. Pao slammed his hand on the table. He pointed at the owner and howled loudly. Seeing the outrage in his customers, the restaurant owner acted surprisingly as if he had no idea about the serious incident. He was even more surprised when Pao shoved the nail to his face. Normally he was the only one in charge of making these fillings, and there was no one else but him doing this job. But the infuriated customers wouldn't patiently listen to his explanations. As the man was still unable to speak, Pao quickly grabbed him by the collar and threw a powerful punch to the man, making both his nose and mouth bleed. The restaurant owner was badly beaten up. Moreover, he was also taken to the police station by Pao and his friends. It was already late and there were only 3 officers on duty. One sheriff named Liu Feng, together 2 of his colleagues, officers Ping and Chao. As they were about to go to the canteen, they heard noises outside. Sensing something bad had happened, the sheriff got out of his seat and went to check. No sooner had he arrived at the door than he saw Chao rushing towards him. "Sir, there are many civilians outside the gate. They want to sue the restaurant owner for leaving nails in the food." The sheriff's face changed color as soon as the situation was reported. With his acute thinking, he quickly figured out this was not a simple case. In less than 15 minutes, the sheriff, together with Chao and Ping, had taken the restaurant owner to the interrogation room. The sheriff gave a brief report on the case to the restaurant owner. It was out of the question for someone to pull out their nails and put them inside the dumplings, so the only convincing explanation for the incident was the fillings of the cakes had been made of human flesh. The restaurant owner was in tremendous shock as he listened to the officer. He seemingly had no idea about it, and he was not the one behind all of this. The sheriff ordered his 2 colleagues to go to the restaurant and examine the dumplings there. At that moment, many people had been reported on the incident. They quickly gathered in front of the restaurant. Many of them were scared to find out about the news. For a long time, the people in this town had eaten the dishes served at this restaurant. So was it true that they had eaten human flesh? However, some of them refused to believe the rumors, as they wanted to go to the scene in person and hear the final conclusion from the cops. Ping and Chao had already been in the kitchen of the restaurant as they started looking for evidence. A few seconds later, large bags of meat that was used to make the dumpling fillings had been found. As the 2 officers opened one of the bags, they were amazed to see what was inside them. The meat had been minced, so they weren't sure whether this was actually human meat or not. Hence, these bags of meat needed to be taken away and carefully examined. The officers reassured the civilians, then took one of the bags back to the station for further examination. After interrogating the restaurant owner, the police had found out about the place where he got the meat for his dumpling fillings. They quickly sent out vehicles to the destination. Inside the house was a muscular man slaughtering a pig with his butcher knife. The man acted bizarrely as soon as he saw the cops. He asked them in an annoying manner, "Why are you people here in my house?" Chao remained calm to the man's ferocious face as he got straight to the point, asking if the man was the meat supplier for the dumpling restaurant in town. As the butcher finally knew what the officer was referring to, he showed no fear. With a serious look on his eyes and a cold voice, the man confirmed he was the one, and asked what the officers wanted from him. Ping asked him what the exact type of meat he gave to the restaurant owner, and how could there be human nails in the dumplings. As soon as Ping finished his sentence, the butcher pulled out the knife from the cutting board and spoke with a cold face. It's not your business to know what kind of meat it is. Why do I have to answer your question anyway? Get out of here, now! As the two officers were still unable to react to the butcher's aggression, the man suddenly rushed to them like a madman, brandishing his knife at them. Chow showed no fear as he faced the psycho. He pushed Ping to the side while dealing with the man with a sharp knife on his own. Ping dodged the blade from the madman and came at him after switching from defense to his attack mode. He quickly blocked the man's knife, holding hand, then used all his strength to wrestle the man to the ground. His heavy body fell into the table, making it break in half. The man felt his body aching and could barely move. Moments later, the other cops had arrived to take the guy to the police station. The case had been rapidly resolved, but Chow still had a thought on his mind that the man had been keeping human bodies in his house. The cops started to survey the scene. As the butcher was taken away, he turned his head and howled that those people deserved to be killed. The officer ordered the rest of the team to quickly find the bodies. The priority now was to find where he kept his victims. The vehicle that carried the butcher made his way back to the police station. The officers who were still at the scene searched the place, but it was more difficult than they thought, as an hour had passed, yet they still found nothing relating to the man's victims. At the moment when the officers were about to leave, suddenly from behind an old lady ran to them. It looked like she wanted to say something. It turned out that she was one of the butcher's neighbors. For years she had encountered with so many bizarre things, but she didn't have the nerve to tell anyone, as she was scared she could be the next victim of the serial killer. When the man was first moving to the neighborhood, he seemed like a good man to her, as if she often saw him helping poor people, giving them shelter and feeding them. But the odd thing was that the beggars, they went into his house and somehow they were never seen again. Moreover, the old lady also added that she also usually heard people sobbing and screaming at night. One night, she plucked up her courage to pull aside the window curtains, only to witness something truly horrifying. There were lots of white shadows appearing in her view. The longer she gazed at them, the more abnormal these people seemed to her. She couldn't make out their faces no matter how hard she tried. On several occasions, she wanted to report the incident to the police, but the fear of being his next victim had prevented her from doing it. But since the man had been arrested, she believed it was the right time to tell the truth. Despite it not their first time dealing with brutal murders, the officers present shivered as they listened to the old lady. Officer Chow quickly ordered the other officers to get shovels and hoes as they headed to the spot where the lady had told them. They believed there was an underground cellar where the man kept the bodies. Nearly 30 minutes later, one of the officers spoke loudly. "There's something very hard here. Come take a look." As Chow had expected, there was a secret cellar in the butcher's house. Before their eyes was an iron lid with handles on the surface. Ping plucked up his courage and then carefully grabbed the handle and removed the cover. A stench came out as soon as the officer lifted it. People at the scene had to cover their noses. Their faces became darkened. Indeed, there was a secret cellar with stairs leading to it. The foul smell together with the pitch darkness inside the place didn't discourage Ping as he courageously walked down the stairs. He shone the flashlight into the dark. His face immediately changed color. What had caused him to be that terrified? Now he was no longer brave enough to keep going, his body frozen. Aside from cutting boards and the knives, there were also things that were truly shocking and beyond one's imagination. Dead bodies hung on the walls, and underneath them were baskets filled with human organs. The case had been cleared. The famous restaurant in town had used human flesh to make its products, and the butcher, it was certain that he would pay for the deadly sins he had committed. Today, I'm going to tell you something that my father went through. In the past, in my father's village, there was a still custom called One Night with the Dead. At that time, the custom of this region was very respectful of men and despised women. The status of woman at that time was quite low. When returning to her husband's house, the woman often had to do hard work. If she did not do well, a woman might be beaten and tortured by her husband as a matter of course. No one had the right to interfere in other people's family affairs, and no one could protect the woman. And of course, the woman's family certainly wouldn't want that to happen to their children. Sometimes the police interpreted the woman's cause of death as suicide, and the husband's family would not bear any punishment. So, in the village, a custom was formed that was, for the first 7 days after the wife's death, the village youth would tie the husband up and lock him up with the wife's body for one night. If nothing happened in the following morning, it meant that the cause of death had nothing to do with the husband or that the deceased had forgiven the husband. The purpose of custom was for the man to suffer some torture for his wife's family to calm down. When my father was young, his friend's sister married. After returning to her husband's house, she hanged herself a month later. So with the support of the brothers, they went to the husband's village and tied the man to perform the above custom. My father said that at the time the man was still very resolute and stubborn, saying that he was very good to his wife and that she had mental problems, so he committed suicide. When the husband found that he would be locked in a room with his wife's body, he got so scared that he screamed and begged to be released. They left him with his wife's body. If he was fine the following morning, he would be free. Before leaving, these people turned off the lights and locked the doors. Suddenly, the whole room was dark. Only the light of the moon shining through the window. The space was completely dark. Only the man and a hanging corpse remained. The husband's eyes were fixed on the corpse. A feeling of fear enveloped him. In this situation, no matter how brave the husband was, he couldn't stand it. He felt fear, his heart pounding in his chest, holding his breath and hoping for a quick morning. The wife's body was covered with a white sheet, motionless. Outside, the husband's screams could be heard clearly. Until midnight, he was too tired to stop. But at this moment, terrible things began to happen to him. He looked directly at the corpse, his whole body shaking with fear. Suddenly, there was a sound in his wife's corpse. The corpse in the room suddenly giggled, accompanied by a terrifying laugh. The corpse shook unceasingly and it stretched the white cloth. The corpse suddenly stood up slowly. Moments later, the corpse was standing upright with its hair covering its face, and it was moving towards the husband. The corpse's legs had already left the ground and slowly rose. Slowly, the corpse was hovering close to the husband, like when hanging in the house. Despite her husband's pitiful pleas, the corpse drew closer and closer. A pair of white teeth opened and a pale face appeared. The corpse revealed a pair of bloodshot eyes, staring at the man as if to say something resentful. Immediately after, a more horrifying scene happened. The neck of the wife's corpse suddenly lengthened. Just like that, the neck stretched out nearly 2 meters like a snake and approached the husband. The large pale face leaned straight in front of her husband. He stared blankly and couldn't move his body because he was so scared. The husband was sweating, unable to make a sound, staring blankly at the body and waiting for the terrible thing to happen to him. The corpse of the woman did not speak, but growled and stared at him with an increasingly angry and fierce expression. Suddenly, the wife opened her mouth wide and rushed towards her husband. The scene was terrible. Suddenly a scream rang out. The husband was so scared that he peed his pants. He kept begging his wife not to come near him. The people who locked him were peeking outside like they were watching a horror movie, and the main character was the husband. Yes, they did not leave. They arranged everything to teach the husband a lesson, as well as force him to confess what he did to lead to the death of his wife. The father's friend was smugly viewing the frightened husband inside. Suddenly, he stopped when he heard a familiar voice from the group behind him. He turned back amazed and confused. "Oh my God, aren't you supposed to be inside pretending to be the ghost?" The friend of my father's friend thought that his cousin was pretending to be the ghost inside. But why was he standing with them outside now? After seeing their cousin still standing there, the rest of them were equally surprised. But the cousin was even more surprised. He took off his wig and said that the plan was predetermined, that it was still half an hour before scaring the husband. It was too early. They were all confused and felt that something was wrong. So who was pretending to be a ghost and scaring the husband inside? The cousin at this time also scratched his head and said, "Strange, isn't it? Do you think the ghost is real?" At this point, these people looked at each other. They deduced that if this cousin was still standing outside, what they saw inside was the real ghost of his wife. They were all scared now, confused and didn't know what to do. Everyone's limbs were as cold as freezing, not daring to move. They slowly looked inside again. It was scary. The long neck of the ghost was threatening the man inside. Looking closely, they could see that it was indeed a real ghost. And the fear was at its peak. They screamed and ran out of the yard. The following morning, these people dared to come back here to check. The woman's corpse was still lying in the house, and the husband had fainted from fear. The man then went crazy, crying and laughing, and saying crazy things to get his wife's forgiveness. Dr. Chan was well known in the area for his healing skills and knowledge of all diseases. One day, he received a very serious invitation from a farmer's house in the village. Following the tour guide, he walked for more than 20 minutes to reach the place. According to the guide, his father seemed to be in a critical condition. "Hurry up, doctor. My father can't take it anymore." Arriving in front of the house, the man opened the old gate and invited Dr. Chan inside. As he led the doctor inside, he hurriedly called out to his mother. "Mother, I invited Dr. Chan to come here." The mother had just come out, repeatedly urging him in because she was afraid that her husband's condition would not make him last long. The mother invited Dr. Chan inside while talking about her husband's situation. Her husband just got sick 2 days ago and was getting worse very quickly. The person lying on the bed was an older man with a pale face and wide open mouth and eyes rolled backwards. Dr. Chan approached to examine the man's situation. The older man rolled his eyes, panicking and continuously shouting, "It hurts so much. They are crawling all over me. Please kill me. I'm in so much pain." A blanket covered the older man, so Dr. Chan didn't know what the man's problem was. so Dr. Chan decided to come and see what was under the blanket. But when he approached, the man strongly reacted to Dr. Chan. He pushed Dr. Chan away. It seemed that the disease had made the man panic and no longer aware of his surroundings. But with his years of experience, Dr. Chan quickly convinced the man to be examined. Despite following the doctor's orders, the older man still seemed to be very uncomfortable and afraid. As soon as he lifted the blanket, Dr. Chan was amazed to see the patient's current condition. The older man's belly was monstrously bulged. Suddenly, the older man appeared to be in pain, as if just moving could make his whole body suffer. Dr. Chan now seemed to understand the older man's condition, so he told the older man's son and wife to hold him tightly. Both of them joined forces to be able to hold the older man down, even though he was struggling with pain. After the older man was held tightly, Dr. Chan unbuttoned the older man's shirt, revealing a tight, swollen abdomen full of veins and blood. Dr. Chan now looked thoughtfully at the large and protruding belly of what looked like tendons. They were all very large and swollen on the skin of the older man's abdomen. But strangely, these tendons could move, or rather, it looked like worms or parasites inside of him. Dr. Chan seemed to have understood the problem. He turned to take out the acupuncture needles from the toolbox. The needles were long and sharp, but Dr. Chan believed that they could definitely help the older man now. Dr. Chan just stopped thinking for a moment, then started his treatment. Acupuncture needles were inserted into the older man's belly in sequence. Dr. Chan was very good at this acupuncture method. After a while, acupuncture needles were quickly inserted all over the man's belly, and the things that looked like worms also started to stop moving. And a few minutes later, they disappeared completely, no longer visible on the skin of the older man's belly. The older man now also began to calm down, feeling less pain, and was able to rest for a while. The son seemed very worried about his father. He hurriedly asked Dr. Chan what strange illness his father was suffering from. Dr. Chan did not talk directly about the disease at this time, but he began to learn more about the time the older man got sick. Dr. Chan said to the son,
"Your father had been infected with a type of poisonous parasite. If left for any longer, it would consume all of his organs. The situation is very dire."
The son asked Dr. Chan if his father would be saved. The wife also said that her husband suddenly became strange a few days ago after cutting grass to feed the cows. That's when he began to feel sick. Upon hearing that, Dr. Chan quickly asked her about the location of the lawn, as he wanted the patient's family to lead him there to check it out and inspect. According to his mother's description, the son also knew the location of the lawn area. By the time it was getting dark, the son had already started taking Dr. Chan because it was around wild grass growing relatively far from their home. On the way, the son still didn't understand why his father's illness had something to do with the wild grass. But Dr. Chan still didn't explain anything. He had his own conclusions. After walking quite a distance, the son said they were almost there. They just have to go behind the cliff and they would arrive. When he arrived, Dr. Chan was amazed and also afraid. It seemed that his suspicions were correct. In front of them was a bunch of weeds, as tall as people and at first glance as normal as any other type of weed. Dr. Chan and the son started to walk closer to the grassy area. The doctor was extremely wary, but the son didn't know what was going on. Dr. Chan walked and looked around like he was looking for something. Finally, he found what he was looking for. Seeing that they had been gone for quite a long time from home, and with the doctor being extremely quiet without telling him about his father's condition, the son began to worry. At this point, Dr. Chan began to explain to the son the cause of the appearance of the parasites. A parasite caused his father's illness. They were infecting and sucking blood from his father's belly fat. The parasite was born from a strange worm, and it only reproduced on this type of weed. After that, Dr. Chan started rummaging through his tool bag. The son still didn't understand what Dr. Chan was going to do. Then Dr. Chan gave the son a thick scarf that looked like it was sewn with many layers. The two began to approach the weeds, and Dr. Chan needed to experiment a bit to be sure to find something that could treat the patient. After a while of searching, Dr. Chan reached out and picked a branch of the tree which grew among the weeds. Indeed, if they looked at it with the naked eye, it would be difficult to distinguish this plant in the middle of a vast lawn. Even the son was very surprised. Dr. Chan held up the branch high and asked the son to look closely above the small leaves, which were the eggs of the parasites. At this point, the son was starting to get scared but still wanted to know what it was, so he also looked at the leaf. And indeed, on the surface of the leaves, there were some seeds, tiny as white as a grain of rice. When he tried to take a closer look, the son suddenly realized that they were eggs and covered with thin membrane-like spider silk. The son wondered, this thing was so small, how could it cause such a terrible disease? Dr. Chan didn't explain much. He just asked the son to take a good look at what he does next. Dr. Chan rummaged through his pocket and pulled out a small vial. Then he gave it to the son, telling him to apply it on his face and hands. Applying this drug would help avoid insects, even those parasitic larvae that attacked the body. After that, Dr. Chan started going deep into the grass, like he was looking for something. The weeds around here were taller than a person's head, so there was a lot of potential for danger. In the end, it seemed that Dr. Chan had found something important that could help cure the older man's illness. After reaching out to pick a tree branch, Dr. Chan showed it to the son. There were many small purple fruits on the branch, which looked very strange. Dr. Chan held it out in front of the son and told him to look for more fruits like this. It grew from the same tree on which the poisonous parasites lay their eggs. Dr. Chan told him to look carefully and pick a lot to bring back to save his father. The two began to split up to find and pick the strange fruit which only reproduced on this plant, and only its fruit could kill those parasites. In just a moment, the two were able to pick a lot of fruit. After getting out of the weeds, Dr. Chan suddenly took a small knife and cut a small cut on his finger. The son was extremely surprised but still very quiet, watching Dr. Chan. Next, Dr. Chan began to drip his own blood from the cut. The drop of blood fell directly onto the leaf containing the small larva eggs. At this moment, the son was putting the leaf on the handkerchief and holding it in his hand. What happened next made him extremely scared. After the drop of blood permeated the egg sacs, they seemed to begin to move. From within the tiny eggs, strange creatures looking like small worms began to break the egg sac and came out. At first, they were just bigger than a thread, but after they sucked all the blood on the leaf, they suddenly became as big as chopsticks. They gradually got bigger and bigger. In an instant, they almost filled out the entire handkerchief the son was holding, making him shiver with fear. At that moment, Dr. Chan took the purple fruit he had just picked. He gently squeezed the fruit and it immediately oozed a purple liquid. After that, he directly dripped it onto a parasite. Miraculously, the purple juice from the wild fruit worked. The poisonous parasite began to writhe in pain and then withered and died. Seeing these things, the son also understood what the doctor wanted to say. Suddenly, Dr. Chan seemed to remember something. He glanced at these weeds and thought for a moment. But now, it was getting dark. They needed to go home with this pile of purple fruit quickly. The doctor did not forget to ask the son if anyone had known this lawn area, and Dr. Chan began to worry when he looked closely at the weeds behind him. He was worried that if he continued to leave this lawn and this dangerous plant here, more people would be harmed. so Dr. Chan asked more carefully if this land was owned by anyone or not. Because the older man's condition was critical, they didn't talk much but quickly went home to treat him. Arriving home, Dr. Chan gave the bunch of plants to the wife and told her to get a basin and squeeze all the juice of these purple fruits into it. After squeezing the juice, Dr. Chan began to pull out all the needles that had been inserted into the older man's belly in the first place. Within those purple fruits seemed to be a lot of liquid, so a full basin was squeezed out. Dr. Chan said to the wife, "Take this wet towel and wipe your husband all over his body." This method would cause pain to the parasites and was intended to force the parasites out of the patient. Following Dr. Chan's instructions, the wife quickly wiped it all over her husband, and then they allowed a few minutes so that the purple juice could penetrate the skin. A few minutes later, when the time came, Dr. Chan held a small scalpel. He cut an extended cut on the patient's wrist. This would be the way for the parasites to escape. And yes, after the purple water had penetrated into the skin, the parasites began to ache and increasingly wiggle beneath the older man's skin. They were crawling around and seemed to be looking for a way to get out. The sight was terrifying. Witnessing what happened in front of their eyes, the wife was terrified, wondering if her husband could stand it. Seeing that Dr. Chan tried his best to comfort her, everything would be resolved soon. At this point, the parasites began to appear all over the older man's body. It turned out that they had proliferated a lot in his stomach and were now trying to crawl out. The parasites eventually discovered the cut on the older man's wrist, so they started making their way there. In an instant, they began to crawl out from the wound on the older man's wrist. The scene was gruesome. Long parasites like worms were jostling to escape the older man's body. At a glance, these parasites were fat and red. It seemed that they had sucked a lot of blood from the older man's body. And after only a few minutes, all the parasites came out from the mouth of the wound. Underneath the floor, Dr. Chan also left a basin of purple fruit juice, so they fell straight into it. The purple juice began to work, directly killing those fat parasites. They withered and decomposed utterly, leaving only a pungent stench like the smell of carrion. After the parasites had all escaped, the older man's body started returning to normal. Dr. Chan turned back and informed the son and his mother that his father was out of danger. Dr. Chan advised a few more things to take better care of the older man. After a few days of rest, he would get better. After that, Dr. Chan also said goodbye to the older man's family because he needed to handle something important. Because he already had a plan in mind, Dr. Chan decided to deal with this problem decisively. Otherwise, many more people would be harmed by this poisonous parasite. That night, Dr. Chan walked towards the weed area in the afternoon. He lit a fire and burned it all. He hoped that no one would be accidentally infected with this blood-sucking parasite ever again.
Lily, a white-collar worker, was a beautiful woman who was born into a wealthy family, yet still led a single life. She and her closest maid had promised to each other that the two would get married to their fiancés at the age of 30. But that afternoon she received a call from a best friend as she was invited to her wedding. Her closest friend was Nana. As of now, the two had been friends for 20 years. Seeing Lily appeared by the door, Nana cheerfully waved at her. But as soon as the two met each other for a few seconds, Lily immediately upbraided her. She reminded her friend that the two had agreed to marry their fiancés at the age of 30, but Nana had broken her promise. Of course, Lily didn't look too serious when she said that her friend Nana, but it made Nana stammer for a few seconds before she could say anything to invite her to the wedding, which was supposed to be on this Sunday. Seeing the expression on Nana's face, Lily couldn't help but laugh. She told her friend that she would definitely show up, more than anyone. Lily was the one that was most delighted to find out her friend had finally found her Mr. Right. The two ended their convo. Since the moment Lily was in the cafe until she left, Lily constantly reminded herself that she had to be at the wedding at all cost. It looked like she was really excited to be part of this special occasion. Eventually, the wedding ceremony had arrived. Lily took the earliest bus to the house of her friend's fiancé with joyfulness mixed with a bit of jitters. Waiting for Lily at the bus station was a boy who was around 16 or 17 years old. It looked like he was someone from the groom's family. But on the special occasion, the boy was supposed to be happy, yet he somehow looked moodily. On the way to the destination, the two didn't say anything to each other. There were times she wanted to break the ice, but the cold look on his face made her speechless. The two remained quiet for another 10 minutes. Feeling unbearable to put up with the oppressive silence, Lily plucked up her courage to ask the young man some questions about the wedding. But he merely responded to her in an abrasive manner. However, the boy's attitude wasn't the only thing that made her feel strange. Contrary to the bustling, noisy atmosphere that was commonly seen at a wedding, the house was deserted. There were no fireworks, even the palanquin was nowhere to be seen. Lily was accompanied by the boy to the house. At this moment, the groom's parents had been waiting inside. Seeing Lily showing up by the door, the two came out to greet her. They graciously asked her if she had felt tiredness on the way. As they were talking to each other happily, Lily suddenly saw a white flower on the mother's chest. As soon as she asked them about the flower, the two's faces quickly changed color. Usually one would have a white flower on them when they were at a funeral, and a red flower when they were at a wedding, so Lily sensed something odd going around. But instead of replying to a question, the woman spoke in a prudent manner. She didn't want to answer, as she told her there was a long story behind it, and Lily would find out about it later. As soon as the woman finished the sentence, the butler came in. He told everyone to get to the next door in order to get in time for the wedding rituals. The woman asked Lily to go to the next door with her and participate in the wedding ceremony. She followed the three of them to the place. But Lily couldn't help but be suspicious. Instead of being decorated with a prominently red color, the room had a gloomy atmosphere. Moreover, in front of her eyes now was a rectangular object that was wrapped with white towels, looking pretty dreadful. As everyone had gathered at the place, the butler pulled away the towels. Lily's face became darkened as she saw the scene before her eyes. She must have been truly shocked. It turned out, the thing which drew her attention was a big coffin laying neatly in the middle of the room. She remembered being invited to the wedding of her closest friend. How had it turned into a funeral? In the coffin were Nana and her fiancé. Nana looked nothing like a dead person, but the man lying next to her, his face had turned pale and colorless. He looked like he had already died. A wedding that was filled with great sorrow. A wedding where the attendances didn't know whether to smile or cry. A wedding so tragic that made anyone present stagger. After a few minutes of bewilderment, Lily finally regained her composure. She couldn't believe her eyes. But right that moment when Lily was in an immense pain, Nana suddenly opened her eyes, which scared Lily stiff. She was terrified, unconsciously stepped backwards. It was until she heard Nana calling her name that she dared to turn around. After a couple of minutes, Lily finally calmed down and suddenly became furious despite being scared just a few moments ago. But the reason of Lily being angry was because she was worried about Nana. Even though she upbraided Nana for scaring her, it was more of an unconditional love she had for Nana that was contained in her words. Having no choice left, Nana had to wait until Lily subsided her anger, then she would dare to explain everything to her. The incident took place just yesterday as Nana and her fiancé were on their way home, after leaving their relative's house. As the two were talking to each other, a truck rushed towards them from behind. It was already too late when the two found out about it. Nana's fiancé pushed her out of the way with great force, while he was still unable to escape the truck running him over. Nana had no idea what was about to happen next. She looked to her husband's direction. The truck now got so close to him, there wasn't any chance for the man to escape, even if he was a god or a man with superpowers. Nana let out a scream as she saw a beloved husband being on the verge of his death. She still had very vivid memories of that tragic moment as her husband reached out to her before he died. His eyes were filled with pure love, regret, and sadness. It was a scene that she would never forget. It was even more tragic as she had to witness the death of her fiancé. The truck ran to him like a mad bull and hit him immediately. Blood splashed everywhere. Lily felt great pain in her heart as she listened to her friend. She didn't expect that her friend would have such a tragic fate. As Nana told her friend everything, she couldn't hold back her tears. Even though her fiancé had died, she still wanted to conduct a wedding ceremony with him and become his wife. That night, the wedding ceremony was conducted in the presence of Lily and both the bride and groom's family members. Nana laid in the coffin. She grabbed her fiancé's arms firmly while fondly gazing at him. Her eyes were filled with pure happiness mixed with a bit of sorrow. She was happy because she had at last become his wife, but it could never fill the aching void in her heart. As the wedding ceremony had come to an end, Lily had to leave even though she didn't want to. Nana accompanied her to the door. Tears kept rolling down her face. But instead of wearing a sad expression on her face, Lily tried to put on a smile and encourage her best friend. Their love had touched Lily's heart. It was such an ultimate sacrifice. A genuine love story between a ghost and a human might sound pretty illogical, but it did happen in real life. And despite it being a bit terrifying to hear, their true love still touched the hearts of many.
It occurred in the spring of 2001, and it became a very well-known story that year. There was a very wealthy family in the village, and the oldest son, Shen, celebrated a big wedding with a village girl named Lan. The wedding was grand and crowded, with many attending to bless the bride and groom. The groom's friends began to tease as well, as if it were a ritual before allowing the two to get into the wedding room for consummation. On the bride's side, some friends and bridesmaids had come to celebrate, so they took advantage of the opportunity to chat with the bride before she officially joined her husband's house. At first, it was just a fun conversation, but then Shen's friends began getting drunk and making fun of the groom, which became increasingly outrageous. They were no longer teasing only the bride, but rather the bridesmaids, who were also in the room. They also forced her to make some pretty subtle jokes. Everyone was drunk at the moment, so the bride couldn't stop the groom's friends. But just as everyone was making a lot of noise, a friend of the bride who was also a bridesmaid at the wedding burst out of the next room. People didn't understand what was going on when they saw her crying and screaming and fled quickly. Her name was May. She ran out of the house before anyone could ask about the situation. Her clothes were strewn about, and her hair was a mess. Everyone was still stunned, but inside the room a friend of the groom was Wu, His face was red, possibly from inebriation. He was not wearing a shirt and was still holding his pants, and he was also perplexed. Wu appeared to have had a bad intention towards May when he saw her sleeping in the bride's room while being drunk, causing her to panic. The bride was furious and scolded him. Everything was serious, but Wu still believed that it wasn't as exaggerated as the bride claimed to be. He was simply drunk, and he blamed May for lying in that room with such a revealing dress on. Hearing this, the bride became enraged, chasing May while turning around to curse Wu. Because May was getting married next month, Wu's actions would jeopardize her honor. Following that, both the bride and the groom dashed out to find May, afraid of that something bad would happen to her while running out this late. May, on the other hand, ran quickly to the forest. She was a very sensitive person, and Lan was afraid that she would have done something reckless. So Lan enlisted the help of everyone to find her. Everyone then raced to find May. This area was quite dark and large, and the longer it took, the more worried Lan became about her friend. People looked for her for half an hour, but couldn't find her. Everyone was talking about going deeper into the forest. After a while of searching, there were results, but what they saw in front of them caused everyone to panic and bewilder. May hanged herself on a tree branch with only her lingerie on, possibly because it was too humiliating and made her consider suicide. Everyone was terrified when they saw the scene. In the dark night, a flashlight flickered, casually shining directly on May's face, revealing the terrifying face of a hanged man, tongue sticking out, eyes open wide and full of blood veins, looking extremely terrified. That angry face and eyes seemed to be looking directly at Wu, who had just done bad things to May. Following that, Wu was arrested for the crime of indirectly causing death and causing mental damage to the deceased's family. However, having lots of relationships and bribe money, he was released the next day because they thought May purposefully committed suicide, which caused outrage among the villagers, but he didn't care and went straight home. It rained heavily that night, and despite the fact that he raped May, he had a wife. His wife began questioning and blaming him as soon as he returned home. The two had a heated argument. The wife couldn't accept his behavior and accused him of being such a terrible man. His parents couldn't stand up for him in this situation. All they could do was give up as they watched the couple squabble. The wife was sobbing while talking, but he neither seemed to mind nor felt bad about it. The more she talked, the more irritated he became, and his wife couldn't take it any longer, so she proposed divorce. He agreed right away, without hesitation. His parents, who were standing outside, were equally impatient and concerned because divorce was no minor issue. If they divorced, it would be extremely difficult to find a new husband for her. However, according to the father, it was his fault, not his wife's. Everyone in this village realized he made a terrible mistake, so no one dared to be with him. His parents heard rash voices continuing from inside the room while he was worried and confused. They thought Wu and his wife were arguing again, so they peered into the room through the glass to keep an eye on them. They only saw the daughter-in-law sitting on the bed, holding her head with both hands, her mouth muttering something inaudible, and she looked like in great pain. They assumed it was because Wu had beaten his wife. Otherwise, why was she holding her head in such pain? But when they looked closely, they panicked. The wife's entire face began to change, becoming strange and frightening. Her body turned pale, her face was green, and her tongue was protruding over her chin. She approached Wu with a resentful expression. Wu had also begun to doze off at this point, so he had no idea what was going on behind his back. His parents stood outside, being aware of that something was wrong, and attempted to wake up Wu by banging on the window. Hearing the noise, he began to roll over, but his eyes remained closed. The wife was now very close to Wu. It was too late by the time he could wake up and open his eyes. His wife was standing right next to him, looking at his wife's face now. He immediately remembered May's face when she was hanged to death. His parents were also eager to enter the room to assist their son, knowing that the wife has been possessed by May. They were nervously screaming, knowing that this was the ghost coming back for revenge, which usually never ended well. So they burst in through the main door and dashed inside the house to the couple's bedroom door. The father tried repeatedly banging on the door and calling out his son's name, but there was no response from the inside. After several attempts to bang on the door without success, the father decided to use force to smash through it. Fortunately, the door was made of wood and was relatively thin, so they were able to get inside after a few hits. However, the scene in front of them caused them extreme panic. The Wu couple was currently on the bed with large puddles of blood splattered all over the room. The mother cried pitifully. Looked like Wu was stabbed and cut by a sharp knife, and the wife passed out on the bed, still clutching a large knife. The two rushed Wu to the hospital, but even if he arrived quickly, Wu would not be able to survive due to excessive blood loss. The news of Wu's death quickly spread throughout the village, and almost no one sympathized as a result, believing that this was the retribution he deserved. People usually come to help at funerals or weddings in the village, but no one did this time. Instead, they stood outside, curiously. After that, the mother went insane and spent her days wandering on the streets looking for her child. And the wife was imprisoned. While being there, she went insane because she couldn't remember why she had killed her husband in such a way. The scary story happened to a guy named Tengu. Every late afternoon, some of the old people gathered in groups of 5 or 7 under the village's top banyan tree to play chess. Tengu was also at the chess game at that time, as he observed and commented. Tengu was the type of person that no one wanted to meet. He wandered around the village all day, and he teased everyone he met. He made many people feel uncomfortable. Originally in a village, he was a thug. He did not research anything, hence before everyone's reaction, he immediately rolled his eyes and did not respect anyone. The village leader was furious, and he ordered that Tengu be punished for offending others. As a result, he simply left. He still tried to turn his head and sneered a few more phrases with a tone that everyone suggested he had spent playing chess for a long time. In his free time, he had nothing to do. Tengu asked people to join in playing cards. He must be a gambling addict. Because everyone knew Tengu didn't have money in his pocket, no one would allow him to play. Even among them, some individuals looked down their noses at Tengu and just gave him a fleeting glance before walking away. While they played cards, they talked about an ancient tomb, the tomb located in the western forest. In the tomb, there was a big fox. The fur of the fox was worth thousands of gold. Whoever found this fox would be rich. Tengu immediately showed great interest when he heard the story. However, the western forest was a dangerous place. Tengu seemed unconcerned about the threat. He eventually located the tomb that the others had indicated after more than 30 minutes of trekking. The tomb appeared to have been there for a long time. Even the inscription on the stele had faded and couldn't be read. Because he thought the tomb must have a big fox in it, Tengu patiently hid at the foot of a tree and waited from afternoon until nightfall. Suddenly, Tengu looked surprised, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was exactly as they said. A red fox had appeared from underneath the tomb. Tengu couldn't hide his joy when he saw the size and fur of the fox. Tengu had never seen any red fox before. If he caught it, he would have a great treasure to sell. The fox appeared to notice that it was being followed. With the ghostly eyes, it returned the stare. Tengu couldn't sleep at night because he couldn't get his mind off the fox. He spent all night to prepare the necessary supplies to trap the fox. Early in the next morning, Tengu went into the forest and carried his handmade trap prepared from last night. After setting a trap, he hid behind a tree. He held a large stick and waited. Tengu fell asleep due to the rapid passage of time. Tengu was finally awakened by groaning after a lengthy sleep. He cheerfully looked and anxiously awaited the results of his rope trap. Indeed, the fox was trapped. The fox's one leg was tangled in the rope. No matter how hard the fox struggled, the fox couldn't get out. Tengu immediately had the opportunity to carry the stick and rushed out as quickly as he could. He intended to kill the fox with one blow of his stick. He swung down his stick and shot right at the fox without hesitation. The powerful blow struck the fox's hind leg. It caused the fox to splatter blood, but it also broke the rope. The fox seized the opportunity and dashed towards the lair beneath the tomb with the last of her remaining strength. Tengu tried to keep up, but he couldn't. It was deep and dark inside, and the cave's entrance was narrow, so there was no way to catch her. Outside, Tengu can only be irritated because there was nothing he could do. He slammed his hand against his thigh, his face flushed with regret because he was only few steps away from possessing a great treasure. He walked away with the stick, but his ambition remained. He was well aware that the fox had been seriously injured and would be unable to move. He'll be back the next day. Tengu couldn't sleep that night because he didn't eat anything all day and came home to find no rice left. He felt hungry. On the other hand, he was worried that the fox would be taken away by others, so he kept tossing and turning. Then, before dawn, Tengu carried his stick into the forest in order to hunt down the fox with a beautiful fur. However, on the way to the grave, Tengu happened to notice a small house in the middle of the murky forest. He'd never heard of people living in the forest before. Furthermore, every time he passed by, he didn't see such a house. The house emitted a bright light, and the longer he looked at it, the more he felt an invisible attraction. As a result, the young man approached with curiosity and excitement. Tengu peered through the window to see if anyone was inside. Then his eyes glowed with surprise and lust. At that moment, inside the house, there was a beautiful young woman who was bathing in a tub full of water. Furthermore, the girl, after discovering Tengu, turned her back to perform some seductive actions in order to invite him in. He couldn't say no to this invitation, obviously. Without a doubt, he opened the door and walked into the house. The delinquent rushed over and extended his hand to the young woman, who stood up and covered her body with a towel. His mouth was drooling, and his eyes were shining as if he was contemplating a treasure. Tengu was now unable to control his actions. He took off his shirt and embraced the girl. But then, the main door was opened, and a group of strange young men who were wielding weapons stormed in. Tengu was quickly subdued by the young boys, who tied his hands and feet so tightly that even if he grew wings, he would be unable to flee. After that, they dragged Tengu out into the forest and tied him to a large tree without giving any knowledge of why. It was almost as if everything was pre-planned. Tengu couldn't think much at that point. He could only cry and plead for his life, but to no avail. One of them, who appeared to be enraged, walked over with a large wooden stick, placed it on the criminal's head, and growled with wide eyes. He didn't say anything. He raised his stick to gain momentum before slamming Tengu in the shin with a powerful blow. There was a cracking sound as his leg was broken. Tengu's eyes were wide and the sound from his mouth rang out in the forest. He was engulfed in excruciating pain. Tengu had already passed out, and by morning he collapsed as he was still tied to a large tree. Fortunately, a hunter came across him and brought him to the village for treatment. Tengu could no longer walk normally after the night, and he might have to rely on crutches for the rest of his life. Tengu had a feeling his broken leg was related to the red fox. A week later, Tengu decided to return to the forest, to the location where he had seen the strange house, to discover the truth. Indeed, when he arrived, the house was nowhere to be found. Only a group of wild foxes were running around. It seemed that it was possibly the revenge of the fox elf herself. It took place in 1983 in a small village north of Jiangzhou, China. Lu and his father, Mr. Yang, were worriedly walking around outside their house. Mr. Yang felt strange in his heart when he saw his son so nervous, so he constantly comforted him. "Mei is in good health. There will be no issue." However, Lu's nervousness was not unusual given that he and his wife Mei had been married for 7 years but had no children. The entire family, including the elderly father who had been waiting for their daughter-in-law Mei to become pregnant, and the time had finally come for her to give birth. And the midwife went into the room all morning and still didn't see anything, so the father tried to comfort his son, telling him to calm down and not to worry too much. Finally, near noon, there were children's cries from inside the house, which delighted Lu and the old father. Hearing the child's cry, everything seemed to become more beautiful and stronger, and the hearts of both the True's family, father and son, seemed to burst with joy as a result of happiness. After 10 minutes, the door opened and Sen, the midwife, stepped out. "Aunt Sen, is our child born?" Lu inquired cheerfully. They were speechless when they learned that Mei had given birth to their first fat son, and Lu was as happy as if he had caught gold. Miss Sen had been a midwife her entire life, and she knew that while Lu was not young, he was a first-time father, so she advised him not to be too hasty and to keep the child's mother from going out in the wind. Lu was so excited that he didn't listen to what Miss Sen said next and ran into the house to see his wife and children. With joy-like celebration, Miss Yang finally had a grandson. He prepared a large red envelope for Miss Sen. However, after a few sentences, the old lady Sen pushed open the red envelope and hurriedly left. "Remember to keep the windows closed at night when giving something for the baby and mom to nourish their bodies." As he watched her rush out of the house, Mr. Yang wondered in his heart, was there something wrong? However, the family and Lu, who were now surrounded by the newborn and Mei, quickly dismissed these minor concerns. Everyone was concerned about May's health because this was her first child, and everyone was overjoyed to see their first grandson. Lou used to lose his temper a lot because May couldn't have children, but now he appeared to be extremely happy with everyone, and he always had a smile on his face. The child had grown stronger and stronger with the help of every family member, and May's body had also recovered. But on the night the baby was born, the moon was very full and something strange happened. The couple was sleeping with their baby in their arms one night. Lou and May were fast asleep. May was startled awake by the baby's cry, which sounded very eerie and strange, and it was frightening. May initially assumed it was her son who had awoken in the middle of the night crying. She didn't know if the child was hungry or in pain. But when she opened her eyes, her son was soundly sleeping next to her. But the crying continued in waves and didn't stop. May considered getting up to listen more carefully, but her body appeared to be pressed by a heavy object, rendering her temporarily immobile. Immediately following that, May felt a small black shadow crawling over her. She was not sure if it was a dream or not. May couldn't move, but she could roll her eyes down and see a baby crawling on top of her. The child appeared to have been born recently, but the entire body was grey, with a few blue veins on the head, and it appeared very frightening. What was more terrifying was that the child had a mouth, and it was covered in layers of sharp little teeth. He was a child from hell. The child gradually climbed onto May's chest, eventually removing her shirt and biting her nipple. Her chest was painfully pierced by the small fangs the infant was sucking. May had now no idea how long the baby had been sucking milk violently like a demon, and she had gradually lost consciousness. May didn't wake up until the next morning. Everything that happened last night was dreadful. May still had a lingering fear from last night's horrifying scene. She thought it was a nightmare, but the dream was too real. Lou awoke some time ago, desperately clutching the child on the ground. What happened? It was strange because their son had been so healthy since birth. He had never cried before, and no one knew what made him cry so hard. Fearing that Lou was clumsy and didn't know how to care for the baby, May got out of bed and continued to care for her son. But the child kept crying, and he kept crying louder and louder, making May impatient and heartbroken for the little child. The child's grandmother was wise and knew that the baby would not cry for no reason, so she advised the couple to closely monitor the baby. However, when the tiny duvet was opened, even elderly people such as the baby's grandmother were taken aback. It was red and swollen on their son's fragile neck, with small holes in the same place. They appeared to have been bitten by small teeth. When May saw this wound, she immediately remembered a nightmare from the night before. She told her mother and Lou about her ordeal last night. After she finished speaking, she felt a slight pain in her chest. When she opened her shirt, she discovered a row of tiny teeth marks. Hadn't she had a dream last night? Didn't the child's grandmother immediately recognize the newborn ghost, as the old people in the countryside used to say? She stated that in rural areas, if a newborn dies, it cannot be buried or burned. Instead, most of them are found in the open field and discarded. It was claimed that these children had suffered too many injustices and that they must be exposed to the sun in an open area to be exonerated. However, some dead babies were born in clouds, moons, and stars, and because these places were rich in yin, they became a kind of newborn ghost, carrying heavy resentment. This type of newborn ghost harbored a deep resentment. They relied solely on nature to find milk everywhere, infecting young mothers who had recently given birth nearby. According to May, she was targeted by an infant ghost. At the time, she had just given birth. When she noticed that the couple was both scared, she quickly said something else so that they wouldn't be too concerned. They followed the child's grandmother to the deserted grasslands west of the village, where children's bodies were frequently dumped. Surely a dead child was thrown nearby, she said. and that child had turned into a ghost infant, and we could tell them apart. Lou and his father spent the night in the grasslands, where they discovered a dead child lying alone on the moor. The features on the dead child's face were hideous and frightening, and his mouth was still stained with blood. The Yang family's father and son couldn't bear what it had done to their children and grandchildren, so they went out and found a lot of wood and placed it on the ghost child. Following that, a fire burned that horrifying ghost child, who appeared to be very frightening. The newborn ghost never appeared again. Lou's son stopped crying, but the baby's body was always a little weak and sick, which the grandmother attributed to the nun's mother's collision. Later, with the help of the midwife Sen, they learned how to better care for the child, and that dreadful story was never told again. Miss Sen also stated that she recently gave birth to a child for a family in a neighboring village, but the child died shortly after birth. Miss Sen recognized this as a bad omen, but no one believed this and did not expect the dead child to actually become a newborn ghost.